What makes a video game stand out in the mind of its players? Is it the graphics and environmental design? Is it the soundtrack and effects? Is it the story and the characters? I would argue that all of these pieces can contribute to that, but none of them ultimately make the difference between a well-designed game and a classic that will be fondly remembered for decades to come. I do believe, however, that what pushes a game to this level is the emotions that it evokes in a player, and the stories that are told and retold about their experiences. And there's a game that has excelled at this from the day it was released in 1994, XCOM UFO Defense. Hello everyone, and welcome to the MS-DOS project. Today I'll be talking about the development of and my experience with the original XCOM. I hope you enjoy, and if you do, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And before I get started on the background, I want to give a ton of credit to the fantastic book titled Monsters in the Dark, The Making of XCOM UFO Defense, for being my primary source for a ton of the information in this video. It's a good read, and I highly recommend picking it up if you want to learn more than I can possibly share today about the creation of this wonderful game. Julian Gollop was an English teenager fascinated with all kinds of board games. Growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, he played many games ranging from tactical affairs like Sniper and Escape from Castle Colditz, to large-scale tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons and Traveller. And while he frequently played these games with his families and friends, he quickly absorbed the rules and wanted to mix things up. He started by taking pieces from several board games and using them to make a sort of hybrid game, and eventually moved on to fabricating entire games from scratch. His games delighted his fellow secondary school board game club members, and these games had varying themes such as wizard-casting spells, time travel and paradoxes, and games about diplomacy and warfare. However, a new outlet for his creativity would soon be presented, and it would take him on a journey that a board game-loving teenager could never have anticipated. At some point in his secondary education, Julian was introduced to personal computers through a Commodore PET in one of his classes. It didn't take long for a classmate to insert a cassette with a simple text-based Star Trek game on it and load it up, but that was enough to spark his imagination. Julian said, quote, "It was this strategy exploration game. That got me interested because it played a bit like a board game, but the computer was keeping certain things hidden from the player because the player had to explore." Close quote. Julian loved the idea of making games for a computer because instead of having to have a games master or rulebook to dictate everything that could and couldn't happen, a program could simply plot things out and make sure the rules were enforced. The problem was that the Commodore PET was very expensive and could only be used at school, and in 1982 was already 5 years old and hardly suited to creating games much more complicated than the Star Trek program. Luckily for Julian, a British company had hit the personal computing market just 2 years prior, and Sinclair focused on making their machines affordable for hobbyists and families. Their ZX80 launched at £100 fully assembled, and in 1982, Gollup was able to buy a used one off of someone else for £25, which is equivalent to about £112 or $145 in today's currency. And with his new machine, he set to work learning how to program and make games even on the limited memory and power of the ZX80. He wasn't able to do much that amounted to a playable product, but those formative days in front of a TV with BASIC ignited a lifelong love of programming and computer game design in Julian that would push him to eventually pursue a career in the field. Upon finishing high school, he upgraded to a ZX Spectrum, which boasted a massive upgrade from 1K of RAM to 48K of RAM, and would finally enable him to begin to translate his complicated ideas and creations to a digital play space. One of his earliest tests would be to try to transfer some of his most popular board game creations into computer games. He teamed up with Andrew and Simon Green, two fellow members of his gaming club, to see what they could produce. The Green brothers were working on the BBC Micro at the time, and before Julian had even graduated, they were able to successfully port over his game Time Lords to the Micro, which would later go on to receive a commercial release. And yes, it was intentionally a spin on that Time Lord, or maybe that one, but probably all of them at once, I suppose. As soon as he finished secondary school, he dove more fully into game development, developing Nebula for the ZX Spectrum, an early 4X strategy game focused on space exploration and building an interplanetary empire. He would also team up with Andrew Green to develop Islandia, a smaller scale but similar 4X title that would focus on colonizing and developing islands. However, with these games under his belt, he still hadn't achieved what he needed to do if he wanted to make it into a career: get paid for them. Luckily for Julian, a small London-based developer was looking for some more programmers to join and work on conversions of tabletop games to computer games. Due to his connection to one of the founding members, Helmut Watson, known as Wolf on the Bulletin Board Systems, Julian was hired at Redshift. "I joined as a member of staff," remembers Gollup. "I wasn't paid very much. £50 a week is what I remember. In retrospect, I should have asked for a royalty on my games because they sold more than others." Close quote. At Redshift, he worked on designing a vehicle editor for a game called Battle Cars, a real-time adaptation of a tabletop vehicular combat game, sort of akin to Mad Max. He also was able to use Redshift to get his products Time Lords, Islandia, and Nebula published, and while they sold very well, he knew that they were just a warm-up for what he could make with more experience and practice. His next project would be the beginning of the roots of what would become XCOM almost a decade later. Rebel Star Raiders was a top-down player-versus-player combat game where each player would control a squad of characters. One player controlling soldiers who had to defend a base, and the other pirates who were trying to infiltrate it. Although it was simply 3 scenarios that were loosely connected and had no single-player mode, it pioneered a lot of later XCOM staples such as action points, line of sight, limited ammo, and character stats. Rebel Star Raiders was a success with critics and customers alike. And although that would seem to have been a boon for Julian and Redshift, it actually spelled doom for the company as a whole. Redshift was an enterprise basically funded and floated by local millionaire investor Stanley Gee. They had struggled to make a profit for the first year or so until Julian came on board and started developing games that sold extraordinarily well. Gee reasoned that because he'd invested the money to make the company happen, that he should get to keep all of the profits while the developers continued on their measly salaries. Of course, no one was really happy with this arrangement, and it certainly wouldn't help Redshift reinvest in its future. So basically everyone quit at the same time. Many of the team went on to create another short-lived developer called Slug, but Julian opted to work mostly independently on his new adaptation of his card game Wizard Wars, which was dubbed Chaos the Battle of Wizards in its computerized form, and he was eventually able to get it published by Games Workshop of Warhammer fame. The game represented a huge step up for Gollup as he introduced a more intricate AI than he'd ever attempting to mimic the actions he saw human playtesters take to make it more realistic to face. Once again, the game sold very well, but even as an independent developer, Games Workshop pocketed most of the earnings. Heading into his second year of study towards a sociology and economics degree required him to reevaluate what he was going to do going forward. He did not drop out of college, at least not at this juncture, as he wanted to finish his degree and show he could accomplish something. He did, however, want to get another game published and decided his time would be best spent developing a sequel to his still popular title Rebel Star Raiders. He also decided he would not be signing a contract to keep developing games for Games Workshop, but would seek a publisher that would allow him to stay in the loop through production and include a larger royalty payout. He quickly set to work on a sequel, titled simply Rebel Star. That would switch from a player-versus-player experience to one that would pit your skills against the computer. Not only did Julian seek to increase the scope of combat by making the map larger than just a single screen, but at the same time made it more intimate by adding stats to soldiers such as morale and endurance. Quote, "Human beings don't want to get killed, and often they don't want to kill," Julian said. "They don't want to do what they are there for, basically. If you're going for a simulation of a battle, morale should very much be a factor. It makes your best laid plans fall apart at the worst possible moment." Close quote. Julian also added names to the troops, and both of these factors combined transformed them from faceless figures you could move around on the battlefield to a squad of people that needed to be carefully considered and protected. A soldier dying started to become more than a piece being removed from the board, but a loss of a person. He also continued to develop more complicated AI to face off against the player, as the simple spellcasting mechanics of Chaos would not suffice for a tactical battle simulation. He developed his own pathfinding algorithms from scratch, ones that would allow units to move from one end of the map to the other, all with consideration of obstacles and major points of congestion. All of this worked together to make the game a much more robust product than Raiders. And despite having to miss classes and spend late nights working on it, Julian had a product he was satisfied players would like. The publisher he had sought out, Telecom Soft, was very happy with the product as well and signed a contract giving Julian a 10% cut of each game sold, which at $1.99 a copy ended up being about 10 pence each. Not long after publishing in 1986, his first royalty check arrived, and to his astonishment he'd earned about £6,000, meaning the game had sold 60,000 copies. Royalties continued to increase after he converted and published a port of the game to the Amstrad CPC, which opened the doors to yet another chunk of customers. It was at this point he decided that this would be his full-time pursuit, and it was not worth his time to continue in college. It was the first time I had a royalty deal, and the first time I got to see some real sales figures, he says of Rebel Star. Ultimately, that encouraged me to think about, I really need to take this computer game stuff seriously, at least from a business perspective. That's when I quit college and started my own computer game publishing and development company. So I left college, not immediately after publishing Rebel Star, but at the end of the year. In order to continue his new career in game development, Julian knew he would need to start a small development shop of his own. He could continue to program games solo, but having the support structure and talents of others on board would enable him to push his games both in scope and technologically. Sometime in 1987, a former college from Redshift, Ian Terry, reached out to Julian about starting their own studio known as Target Games. Julian moved out of his small flat in Islington and came back home with his family in Harlow, where his dad contributed substantially to getting his son's operation off the ground. Having been the one who initially sparked Julian's interest in gaming and always his biggest fan, he invested £16,000 into the enterprise in order for them to rent out office space and buy equipment. For Rebel Star 2, Ian worked on the graphics and artwork, and Julian worked on the programming. The game improved the artwork and focused on a battle to kill an alien queen, sort of like in the movie Alien, and then evacuate before a timer ran out. The title was popular, and while not as innovative as the previous game, it helped propel Julian onwards to his next project. Around the same time as Julian Gollop was starting work on his next game, Target Games signed on another Ian Torrey, who was to work on a conversion of Rebel Star 2 for the Commodore 64. However, he did not know assembly language, so Julian had to devote much of his time to teaching him the ropes. At the same time, Ian Torrey was not really doing much, as he reasoned that art was not really a priority at the outset of a project. Julian's father was not happy with this arrangement and wanted to rearrange the company to oust both Ians. Luckily for him, however, Torrey and Terry left on their own to form a studio with an accountant that they had met from the next office over. That partnership soon folded as well, but Julian was happy to find someone else to fill the gap. Because Target Games had been so short-lived and a succession plan was never put in place in case one of the primary shareholders left, Julian and his father simply shuttered Target and launched a new studio called Mythos. This time, however, it would start as an entirely Gollup family affair, as his brother Nick would join as the third co-founder and artist. To be honest, I kind of drifted into it, Nick said. I was taking an economics degree, but I was becoming more invested in computing. Unfortunately, I didn't get into the course I wanted, so I went back home and a couple of Julian's friends who had started Target Games with him had dropped out of the company. I kind of filled the gap, so to speak. Close quote. Luckily for Nick, their first title as a team, Laser Squad, would be the perfect opportunity to cut his teeth on 6502 assembly, as well as art design. Although built on the same bones as the previous Rebel Star games, Laser Squad upped the stakes by hiding enemies from you when out of sight, meaning your plans had to be much more cautious. Destructible terrain and walls were added, and the AI was improved significantly to be able to patrol and adapt to the ever-changing conditions of a scenario. Nick helped to create art as well as program things like firing algorithms for the soldiers, and eventually worked on ports for other 8-bit computer platforms such as the Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit machines. When they eventually found a publisher for the game in Blade Software, they not only agreed to publish the versions they'd created so far, but also to work on ports for the newer 16-bit machines such as the Atari ST and Commodore Amiga. After Laser Squad, Julian decided he wanted to take a second crack at wizards and spells, so he set his eyes on a sequel to Chaos, this time titled Lords of Chaos. The game was innovative on 8-bit systems for its added complexity and ability to level up your wizard over time, but the 16-bit platform was where the game really shone. Quote, "The map was revealed according to what your creatures could see, so the game used a lot of line of sight checks in the 16-bit versions," says Julian. In the 8-bit versions, the map was just there. We were really reaching the limits of what you could do on a spectrum in terms of the sophistication of the game, close quote. Despite the high quality of the game, a major problem cropped up. One day, a distributor phoned Julian asking when he could expect the hundreds of copies he'd ordered to arrive, and the brothers had to investigate. Blade had run into financial issues, and not only did they struggle to get copies out to distributors, but the royalty checks never showed up. So they decided it was time to drop Blade and aim larger, more expansive, and go for a serious publisher who they knew could take their projects to the next level. With the massive success of Laser Squad, Julian wanted to make a sequel, but there were several key changes to be made. Probably the biggest was abandoning his stalwart ZX Spectrum and similar 8-bit computers for the up-and-coming IBM PC and MS-DOS platform. Gollup had been convinced of the viability of the PC platform going forward because of two vastly different games, Wolfenstein 3D and Sid Meier's Railroad Tycoon. Both of these games were only possible due to the power of the PC and were widely successful in the United States, which was a market that Mythos really wanted to capture. Strategy games were especially popular there at the time, and the PC was determined to be the best way to make inroads stateside. The second major shift was to abandon the top-down perspective his games had long used, and instead switch to a more angled isometric perspective. This would enable him to add the third dimension to the game, as now obstacles and even levels of building could be stacked on top of one another in a way that made sense. All of this would significantly complicate Laser Squad 2, but also open up scenarios to a larger variety of possibilities and player strategies. They built out a small demo over the period of a few months to show to publishers, and then narrowed down who they wanted to pitch it to two main players. One was Domark Limited, which would eventually become Eidos Interactive of Deus Ex and Hitman fame. Domark had reached out to them earlier on during Laser Squad's development, so it seemed likely they would be interested in a sequel. The second publisher seemed much more unlikely, but was the partner they hoped would elevate their productions to the next level. This publisher was Microprose. Quote, "For us, they were the #1 strategy game publisher," Julian says. "They were US based and all their games were coming out of the US. It was a long shot, but we still thought Microprose was the best. Nick loved Sid Meier's Civilization, but doubted a juggernaut like them would even think about working with Mythos. Quote, in fact, when Julian said we should take Laser Squad 2 to Microprose, I thought, I don't think Microprose will be interested. Julian's being overly ambitious here." Close quote. In 1991, when they were shopping their demo around to potential publishers, Julian and Nick Gollop received an invitation from Peter Moreland, who at the time was Deputy Director of Development at Microprose UK, to visit their office in the southwest England town of Chipping Sodbury and show off their demo. When they arrived to Peter's office, the Gollups pulled up chairs and Moreland popped in the disc and played as they explained how things worked. Technically, the demo boasted a smooth-scrolling isometric map and soldiers able to move around terrain populated with enemies. 2 players could have a go, and combat had a pseudo-3D feel. Moreland told the brothers that he would talk it over with his team, and continued playing with it after they left. He called in designer Stephen Hand to take a look at it, and while he was not initially impressed with the demo, when he found out that Julian Gollop was behind it, he campaigned hard to get Microprose to sign a deal with Mythos. Hand later said, quote, "I wanted to sign up Mythos and then set about creating the game I wanted. I didn't particularly want to sign the demo I was seeing. In gameplay terms, it actually fell a step backwards from Laser Squad. But then I was used to seeing stuff in early stages, so it was all about sensing potential and trusting the developer." Close quote. Moreland agreed, but the US division had to make the final call, and luckily Paul Hibbard, Director of Publishing, saw the demo's potential and gave the go-ahead to proceed with the project. Moreland called Mythos to let them know of the good news, but also asked them to bring more than just a demo to their next meeting. Julian recalled, "They requested a storyboard of the game. I was very confused by this request. I mean, how do you storyboard a strategy game? It's not a film." Julian was up to the task, however, and laid out a potential intro sequence and a few snapshots of what gameplay would look like. At the first meeting, a few other people were present, including designers and marketing, and Moreland laid out what they wanted from the game. He said they liked the demo, but were not really interested in simply making Laser Squad 2. But instead they wanted to aim for a game larger in scope akin to Civilization. Looking back, I think there was a rivalry between the US and UK offices, says Mike Brunton, designer. I may be being unfair, but I think the US saw us Brits as country bumpkins who didn't really get the whole PC gaming thing, but were good for lightweight games on other systems. Partly, of course, this was because UK coders didn't work on PC. They were all people who'd grown up programming Sinclair machines and BBC Micros. We were looking to compete with what our American brethren were producing, which were much bigger games. What Julian and Nick had was, although a strategy game, it was small scale." Close quote. Julian was encouraged by this prospect, as he'd wanted to eventually design larger scopes for PC games anyway, and this was the perfect opportunity. The meeting dragged on for over an hour and a half, and not much of it was productive as the Gollups and Microprose representatives were not really seeing eye to eye on what the product should be. Moreland posited an idea that would shape the whole project fundamentally. What about aliens? "It's not enough to have a really cool game that plays well," explains Brunton. "As soon as you say UFO, you've raised certain expectations in your audience. People know what's coming when you tell them you're doing a UFO game. Flying saucers, mysteries, and bug-eyed monsters invading planet Earth. The idea has instant traction, and it's easier to market a game that is based on something that people already know than to sell the idea behind the game as well as the game itself." Many at the Microprose UK offices were fans of Jerry Anderson's 1970 TV series UFO, which showed an underground organization fighting back against an alien invasion. And a lot of that influence crept its way into what became XCOM. Julian even bought VHS tapes of the show to go back and watch. And while he didn't care for the costumes or alien designs, he loved the idea of intercepting alien craft in flight. He also researched reported claims of UFO abductions and sightings in order to better incorporate the feeling of a real-life UFO mythos into the game. With the immediate theme of the game squared away, Nick and Julian signed a contract that would give them £3,000 a month to help fund the project. Microprose estimated the project would take 18 months, and at the same time proved that no one really knows how to estimate software development, as it took almost 3 years to be completed. However, they were very content with the arrangement, as this was the first time they actually had development funded up front instead of later on through royalty payments. However, at this stage, Pete Moreland once again asked Julian to produce something he never really made before, a design document. When I produced an initial game design document for them, which was about 12 pages long, I'd never written a design document before. By the way, it was a very high-level thing. It didn't go into a lot of detail, Julian admits. The document, however, was pretty bad. And even Stephen Hand said it was so bad that if he didn't love Laser Squad, he would have canned the project. But a further visit from Julian to Microprose, where he laid out his plans, did a much better job of securing the future of the game. The game would be split between 2 levels of detail. The higher level would be a view of the Earth from space, where you could build bases and monitor alien activity, as well as shoot down alien craft. The other more tactical view was much more akin to Julian's previous efforts, where soldiers would be deployed in position to hunt down extraterrestrial foes. His original designs did include sketches of aliens that would be fought, but Steve Hand didn't love most of them besides the little grey men. Luckily, Microprose was a much bigger operation than Mythos, and they could bring in more manpower to make the project as good as it could be. Moreland assigned Tim Roberts as the game's project manager, and Roberts similarly added John Wrightsey and Martin Smiley to handle artwork. Wrightsey had drawn up tons of sketches of aliens, so Julian, Brunton, and Hand went to Wrightsey's office to look at what he'd come up with. We went down to John's computer and he had a whole selection of sprites. Steve Hand and I picked from those sprites which aliens would be in the game, Julian remembers. John had a superb art style that everyone at Microprose thought was brilliant for the game. It was manga-esque, says Mike Brunton. And it was a way of Microprose giving added value to the product. Day-to-day design and coding was handled extremely well by Julian and Nick. Art was an area where we could bring something really worthwhile to the party. I will talk a bit more about the final art style later on, but needless to say, John Wrightsey had a profound impact on the final product. He also worked on the striking intro to the game, which would clearly establish the threat in the mind of players, while also helping the whole team to focus on what kind of game they were trying to make. Back at Mythos, the team set to work on building the bones of the project. One of the more ambitious pieces of development was the Geoscape screen, the higher level game mode that would show a map of the Earth. Nick Gollop was almost solely responsible for this piece of design, and not only was he able to create a fully rendered and movable 3D model of Earth, but he also incorporated a shading system that would show the night-day cycle of the entire planet. What he did there was an innovative bit of 3D programming for the time, adds Julian. I don't think there was any other game that had such an Earth view simulation going on. Close quote. Julian also had his work cut out for him, as the larger scope meant that he could not simply rely on a few carefully scripted maps and scenarios, but would need to build a system that would allow for creation of many maps for hundreds of different scenarios. He initially toyed with generating maps fully procedurally, but decided that would have been too difficult to implement with the resources they had. Instead, he built dozens of small sections of maps, all of which could be connected in different ways in order to create hundreds of different maps, making each battle a unique experience. I basically did enough map sections I thought were necessary to make the game interesting without having to do too much work on it, Julian later recalled. And while this was not actually a full random map creation, it accomplished the goal that he was hoping to achieve with battle scenarios. Quote, that was an aspect to it as well, Julian says. Pure efficiency in terms of development. Getting more bang for your buck in a way. Procedurally generated content takes a bit more effort on the programming side, but you get more diverse outcomes for the player's experience. One of the main points of interaction between the two modes was the day-night cycle. After Nick had created a clock and day-night cycle for the Geoscape, Julian proposed that they implement it into the creation of individual battles as well, with the time of day massively affecting soldier visibility, and adding on another level of strategy for players. Now not only having to decide how to engage with the enemy, but at what time of day as well. Production continued fairly smoothly, both at Mythos and at Microprose UK. But trouble was brewing on both sides of the pond that threatened to kill the project before it could get to market. While Sid Meier's strategy titles had garnered tons of success for Microprose, the company had burned millions on a failed arcade division focused on 3D flight sims. Then, in September of 1992, the pound sterling collapsed in the UK, driving Britain into a recession and putting the UK studios at risk. Due to these two factors, Wild Bill Steely, president and CEO of Microprose, sought a merger with Spectrum Holobyte to save the company. They agreed to invest $10 million and Steely would resign. Following this merger, they closed 2 UK studios, laid off 40 developers from the main UK office, and took charge of all publishing decisions. The first of these was to cancel the in-development title, as they did not want it in their future plans, despite the protests of the chipping Sodbury brass. Secretly, a plan was hatched by Pete Moreland, Paul Hibbert, and Microprose UK CEO Adrian Parr. Adrian said that due to the low cost to keep the project going until it was finished, they could afford to just keep working on it and not let anybody know what would happen. They all kept what the US leadership had said secret, and Stephen Hand didn't find out for almost 20 years. Julian and Nick Gollop were also kept in the dark, as the leadership thought the game would turn out much better if they were not told of the cancellation. Development continued in silence for a while, but just before Christmas of 1993, US leadership came to the UK office with a request. The quarterly results Spectrum would have to report were not looking good, Moreland explains. They asked if we had anything in development that we could pull forward to the next quarter. Moreland smiled. We said, actually that game you told us to cancel, it's nearly complete. And they were thrilled. Suddenly, it was the golden game. Microprose agreed to publish the game, but only on the condition that it would be released before the fiscal year ended on March 31st of 1994. The Gollups were then informed about the situation, and because of the new tight deadline, they would need to temporarily move to Chipping Sodbury so they could work in close contact with the rest of the team. Nick and Julian stayed in a guest house near Microprose UK, and opted to go in early every morning rather than bunk down at the office. We were there all day, maybe 10 hours or so, says Julian. They crunched past midnight many days, and faced the challenge of having to finish critical systems like the dynamic difficulty system without the time to properly test it. Julian stated, "We had such a lack of time to play the game through from beginning to end. I mean, I never played it through from beginning to end, which was a major mistake. It's not that I didn't try. I'd start playing through, then we'd come across some kind of bug that needed to be fixed, and we had to go back and change some stuff, and I'd have to start my playthrough again. Of course the game had changed. It was because it was crunch time near the end of developing where we were doing a lot of bug fixing and trying to QA the game from a gameplay and balance point of view. It was very difficult. Despite the difficulty of a several month-long crunch and the financial pressures facing the company, UFO Enemy Unknown went gold in March of 1994, and was an instant smash hit in the UK. Mythos' earlier titles had sold in the tens of thousands, but UFO quickly sold hundreds of thousands. The real question would be how well it did in the States, and that came with a name change. I don't know who on the US side was involved in that decision, Julian says of the rebranding, but it kinda made sense. UFO Enemy Unknown is sort of generic, whereas from a sort of brand franchise development point of view, using X-COM was a good move. It became the name for the whole series. Stephen Hand had coined the term X-COM, short for Extraterrestrial Combat, for the organization that you would control to fight against the aliens, and it ended up sticking for the name of the series. Luckily for Microprose UK, the game itself was a massive success in the US. PC Gamer in the UK packed in a demo disc of XCOM in the summer of 1994, a demo which was also heavily distributed on AOL and bulletin boards in the US. Soon after, it hit the shelves stateside to massive success and critical praise. The game ended up selling over 600,000 copies, with around half of those coming from the other side of the pond. Computer Gaming World called it one of those rare and dangerous games capable of drilling into your brain, putting a vice grip on your imagination, and only releasing you when it has had enough. And GameSpot said that it was a bona fide modern classic, standing proudly along Civilization and Populous as a benchmark in the evolution of strategy gaming. For Mythos and Microprose UK, it had reached and far exceeded all their hopes and dreams. But how does it hold up today? In Europe, the game was sold as UFO Enemy Unknown, and had this really cool cover art. Now, these interesting looking aliens do not resemble any of the aliens we see in the game, and it's not even particularly close. But I think it's a cool piece of cover art nonetheless. It also sported the tagline, "Command Earth's Forces Against the Alien Terror." The back features several screenshots showing off many different aspects of the game, and summaries of what to expect across different moments of gameplay. Of course, when the game came to the US, it sported the name change to the now iconic XCOM UFO Defense. But on the flip side, the box design took a large hit. The front of the box now looks much more generic, and even more detached from the game, with a spaceship that doesn't really closely resemble any ship designs featured in the game. The back also changed and reduced the number of screenshots, but the text is almost exactly identical to the European version, so all of the important information was retained. I'm unsure if this is a common feature with both versions, as I only own the US one, but this box also feels really cheap due to the actual art being a slipcover for a generic folding cardboard box. I know this was common in Microprose games of this era, as I have several like this, and I'm sure it cut production costs, but I always preferred the Origin Systems 2-piece pull-apart box over this style. Opening it up reveals a hefty manual, the game which came on either floppy disks or a CD, which for some reason the previous owner of my copy transplanted mine into a Dreamcast case, and some technical supplements and registration materials. The game manual is a particular highlight for me, as this 120-page tome not only breaks down every screen, button, and mode in the game, but also provides many tutorials on how to use them effectively. Even today, this is a must-read for playing the game, whether that be a physical or digital copy. The manual also includes a little background information on the setting, which isn't explained in the game itself, but is a cool little bit that explains how XCOM got started up. Quote, "It's the year 1999. Unidentified flying objects have started appearing with disturbing regularity in the night skies. Reports of violent human abductions and horrific experimentation has struck terror into the hearts of millions. Mass public hysteria has only served to expose Earth's impotence against a vastly superior technology. Many countries have attempted to deal independently with the aliens. In August 1998, Japan established an anti-alien combat force, the Kiryokai. Equipped with a Japanese-made fighter aircraft, the Kiryokai certainly looked like a powerful force. However, after 5 months of expensive operations, they had yet to intercept their first UFO. The lesson was clear. This was a worldwide problem which could not be dealt with by individual countries. On December 11, 1998, representatives from the world's most economically powerful countries gathered secretly in Geneva. After much debate, the decision was made to establish a covert independent body to combat, investigate, and defeat the alien threat. This organization would be equipped with the world's finest pilots, soldiers, scientists, and engineers, working together as one multinational force. This organization was named the eXtraterrestrial Combat Unit. Nowadays, the game is widely available on both Steam and GOG for cheap, and the GOG version comes with the manual, so I would recommend that version of the game. I do also recommend for anyone playing the game on modern hardware to install Open X-COM. Open X-COM is an excellent open source port of both X-COM UFO Defense and its sequel Terror from the Deep, and adds a lot of modern features and configuration options, along with mod support for expanded replayability. I, however, am a masochist and played the game on my 486, so my review is based on my experiences playing the game in its original form. Running the setup program for installation or any time later on for the DOS version offers a myriad of options for both music and sound effects. I was silly and didn't pay attention to my sound effect options, so I inadvertently played for hours with no sound effects. For this playthrough though, I used the Roland MT32 as my music device and the Sound Blaster 16 as my sound effects device, which I later on set up with the proper interrupts. But the game also supports much cheaper budget sound cards like the AdLib or even Kovacs sound source. Once you're done configuring the game for your setup, or probably not if you're playing on a modern computer, you can start the game up and this awesome intro plays. This intro is honestly one of my favorite of any DOS game ever. No text, no story, not really any dialogue, just a simple comic book-esque sequence that explains exactly what you're up against, but also shows you that you can shoot these aliens all the way back to space. The music is also just an excellent piece, and one I find myself listening to even outside of the booting up of the game. If you are in version 1.3 of the original game or earlier, this screen will pop up as soon as the intro ends. This is the game's copy protection, and requires you to open the specified page in the manual, find the 8-digit code at the bottom, and punch it in. Otherwise, you just simply can't continue to the main menu. For the 1.4 version of the game, which is what is available on all modern platforms, this has been stripped out, so no need to punch it in every time you start it up on Steam. Once you enter the correct code, you're dropped onto the main menu, which very simply has buttons to start a new game, load a saved one, or quit to DOS. You're given 10 save slots, which can be used for one game or multiple, and you can save at any time, including during a mission. Upon starting a new game, you will be asked to choose a difficulty level from 1 to 5, and then dropped onto this screen. This is the main map you'll be looking at all game, and it is known as the Geoscape. It's very confusing to know what you're looking at to start with, but there are just a few important controls that you need to know. The main portion of this screen is taken up by a map of the Earth, which shows up-to-date day and night for different parts of the globe, as well as any bases you place down and UFOs that have been detected. In the bottom right, you can move around this map with 3 different icons. The one on the left allows you to rotate the globe up, right, down, and left. and the two on the right allow you to zoom in and out on any particular spot. After a few minutes you'll get used to it, and you don't need to constantly adjust the map by hand, so it never becomes too much of a burden. The first thing you're prompted to do is place your first XCOM base, and the manual will encourage you to place it in the middle of a large populated area so that you can best detect and defend against alien attacks. And I would give you the same advice. I placed my first base in Central Europe and named it EU Base because the creative juices just simply were not flowing. But you can name yours whatever you would like. Before looking at our newfound base, however, we will want to familiarize ourselves with the rest of the Geoscape's functions. The middle third of the right side shows the current time and date, and I assume this is based on UTC, but I couldn't find any definitive answer. And alongside this clock, there are buttons that allow you to select how fast or slow you would like time to pass. This is very useful when you are waiting for your next UFO encounter, or simply want to wait around for your research to complete. The top third is where most of the action and information lies. The intercept button allows you to send out any of your own aircraft, whether that be to patrol an area, shoot down a UFO, or send soldiers into a craft site or alien invasion to fight them off. The bases button allows you to see and manage any of your up-to-date bases, but I'll talk about this portion of the game in its own section as it's a large portion of the gameplay. The graphs button is super useful as it allows you to see all kinds of facts and figures ranging from UFO activity to XCOM activity and finances. Many of these graphs can be filtered and compared by region or country. And while I didn't consult this all the time, or maybe as often as I should, you'll probably find it super useful if you were wondering why you're falling behind or struggling. The most useful chart here is score under finances, as I believe this is the only place you can check your score on a day-to-day basis, and keeping a positive score is necessary to win a campaign. So check here often to see how you're performing overall. The UFOpedia is basically this game's version of the Civilopedia, and that was very intentional on the part of the designers. Pete Moreland wanted Mythos to basically rip the feature off from Civilization in order to increase the scope and bring it on par with that game, and thus it operates very similarly. Here you can access facts and figures about any technology, facilities, and weaponry that have been unlocked, as well as anything you learn about the aliens throughout the course of the campaign. Not every piece of information is the most useful, but you'll want to check back in here often to make sure you're equipping your soldiers with the best available gear, as well as taking advantage of any alien weaknesses that you find. The last two buttons are fairly simple. Options lets you save, load, and quit, and the Finance tab shows you how much funding you're receiving from each of the nations that sponsors XCOM, as well as how much that has increased or decreased from the previous month. Once you're familiar with the regular Geoscape interface, the first thing you'll want to do is check out your first base. The first base you build will be equipped with several things you will need to get started, including hangars, living quarters, workshop, labs, and a radar system. It also comes with 2 interceptor fighters and 1 transport craft called a Sky Ranger, which will allow you to start shooting down and fighting aliens as soon as you detect them. You also start with 10 of each of the basic employees, soldiers, scientists, and engineers, which are critical to any operations that you undertake at the base. There are a ton of buttons here and I won't go over every single one of them in depth, but a few are critical for making sure you stay ahead of the alien threat. For now, there's a few options that you'll want to pay attention to in order to best manage your base. The first one allows you to build a new base anywhere in the world. And this is important not only to have more defenses, but mostly to be able to detect and shoot down aliens in more parts of the world, which in turn increases the trust that governments will place in you. Next, you can view base information, which shows you a myriad of reports such as available personnel, space left in stores, labs, and workshops, and how well the base can defend itself against alien attacks. It's also here that you can check monthly costs to see how much it will cost to maintain your facilities and crafts and pay salaries, which comes out of the income that you get from the various countries each month. Going down the list a bit, you can also transfer any of your equipment or employees between bases, and purchase or sell and sack them at any time. The bottom button will take you back out to the Geoscape. While you're in base view, time does not flow at all, so you can take as much time as you need to arrange things accordingly. You can mouse over each facility and it will tell you what it is if you don't remember what each of them do, and you can build new facilities by clicking the appropriate button. More will come available to you as you research more things, but at the start you may want to consider adding a few basic facilities that you are missing, such as alien containment and missile defenses, and doubling up on things such as living spaces and general stores so that your base can support more people and hold more equipment. You can place these facilities down in any arrangement that you like, as long as they share a wall with a completed facility. So have fun with it and design your base to your own liking. When you go to build a new facility, a pop-up shows how much it will cost to build, how long it will take, and how much the maintenance will cost each month. You will want to make sure that you can afford these, but also start building them early, as some take close to a month to build, and you will want to take advantage of them sooner rather than later. You then get to choose where in the base to place it. but new rooms must always be touching a completed run. Rooms almost always only take up 1 grid space, but hangars take up a 2x2 section of grid, so plan accordingly if you would like to add 1 or more hangars to your base in the future. There's a lot more that goes on in the base building mode, however much of it only becomes relevant after some time has passed in a campaign. So let's get into the meat of the game, fighting aliens. Heading back to the Geoscape screen and waiting around for a bit will eventually get you your first UFO notification. You don't get much information, mostly just the size of the craft, the altitude that it's at, and the speed and direction it's traveling. You are given the option to either center on the UFO and slow back down time to 5 seconds, or you can just choose to ignore it and continue on as if it doesn't exist. Either way, early on you should probably choose to intercept all UFOs. Clicking on the intercept button will give you a list of all craft with their status, current location, and number of weapon systems and heavy weapon platforms on board if applicable. You may choose one of these by clicking on it, and then clicking on the little red cross that indicates a UFO. Once your fighter catches up with the UFO, you've detected its game on, and you'll have a pop-up window that represents dogfighting. Now originally Mythos wanted this mode to be a more engaged first-person dogfight mode where you would have to shoot down the craft by hand. But Microprose felt that it was not visually convincing enough and that a simpler presentation would work better. So Julian Gollop reworked this part of the game into what you see here. This window may seem very confusing, but the manual breaks it down in a way that makes a ton of sense. On the left side is a representation of the fight, with the little triangle at the bottom representing your craft and the dot near the top representing a UFO. Superimposed on this radar picture are little lines and images that represent the maximum range of equipped weapons and how much ammo they have left over. On the bottom is a readout that will tell you of current combat actions such as hits and misses, and the number above that tells you how close the 2 craft are to one another. The side buttons may seem fairly abstract, but clicking on them reveals that these can change your attack strategy. You are able to select between a standoff, cautious standard and aggressive attacks, as well as retreating. There's also this little button down here that shows you a side profile of what the UFO looks like, but it doesn't seem to show damage or anything, so I assume this is just for fun. The first craft you encounter will likely be a small or very small UFO, so there's little risk in going in with a standard aggressive attack and trying to shoot it down. There's a chance that it will deal you some damage as shown on the little graphic in the middle of the screen, but that tends not to become a concern until a few months into the game. One thing that the game does not explicitly tell you that you can do, but the game manual makes note of, is allowing multiple of your fighters to engage a single UFO at once. You can accomplish this simply by hitting the small button in the top left while in standoff, which minimizes the window, and allow your other jet to catch up before reopening the window and having both attack at once. The manual states that you can do this with up to 4 craft at once, but I've not personally attempted it in a campaign with more than 2. Once you successfully down the UFO, a white X will appear on the map if you caused it to crash over dry land. And here you will be able to initiate the combat mode of the game, the Battlescape. By selecting the Sky Ranger from the Intercept menu, you can land and begin your first actual battle against Little Green Men, or Little Gray Men as they are in this case. Once you land your transport, you will be greeted with this screen. Here you will be able to change the equipment of any and all soldiers aboard the craft. You can even remove gear from one soldier onto the floor of the transport and equip it onto another. For now, you can probably go ahead and hit the OK button to start the battle once you make sure that everybody at least has a weapon. The structure of battle is fairly simple. You get your turn first, where each soldier gets to take a certain number of actions determined by the number of time units that they have. Once you have taken all the actions you desire for every soldier for that turn, the aliens get their turn to do the same. Control then turns back over to you and the battle continues in this manner until either all of your troops are dead, all of the aliens are dead or stunned, or you choose to pull your troops out to cut your losses. Of course, there's a lot more that goes into it than that, but this is the basic flow of how combat encounters work. When you begin a UFO crash site mission, you will start like this with all of your soldiers on a craft, and a very narrow view of the map that has been revealed to you. At first glance, this interview is extremely complicated. However, once you start to use things, it becomes pretty self-explanatory and natural to use, even without deeply consulting the manual. The large slots on the left and right represent the weapons or equipment your soldiers have in the left and right hand, and clicking them will allow you to do various actions with them. I'll talk more about this when I talk about equipment, however. The stacked bars with tons of buttons are largely used to help you manipulate the map as well as quickly switch between units in your squad. The 2 buttons on the left are largely useless at first, but will later be used to move your soldier up or down a vertical level via elevators or through other methods. The 2 ladder-looking buttons to the right of these help to move the viewport up or down a level, which can help you to see units on different levels of terrain as well as switching between floors and buildings and ships. This one is very important as your ship is 1 level above the ground, meaning you'll need to switch focus levels several times while offloading your craft, and even to see aliens that are on the ground while you're still aboard the craft. Right besides these buttons are ones that allow you to set the soldier to be standing or kneeling, as well as a map screen. The map screen shows you the map that you've revealed from a top-down instead of an isometric perspective, with as updated information as you have. Yellow dots represent XCOM forces, blue dots aliens, red dots civilians, and white crosses dead aliens or humans. This can be useful if you want to get a more large picture idea of what the battlefield looks like, or if you would like to look for areas of the map that you've not combed through yet. The rest of the buttons includes one to return to the equip screen, recenter your view on a soldier, select another one, or to end the turn or the mission. There's also a small question mark button that pulls up some options specific to the Battlescape mode. Here you can adjust the speed and type of scrolling around the map, as well as the speed of both the aliens and XCOM soldiers and the speed at which their shots travel. You can also save here but can't load, so if you really want to save skim a battle, you'll have to abort out to the geoscape and load back into the save. It's technically possible to do this, but really tedious, and I think it defeats a lot of the tension of the battles. Now that a lot of technical details are out of the way, I want to talk a bit more about what the experience of combat is like and how it relates to the title of this video. Your first time stepping off the Sky Ranger may feel like, for lack of a better metaphor, stepping out onto the beaches of Normandy. You have no idea what to expect, what to look for, and what to do, and very likely one or half a dozen of your fresh rookie soldiers will get cut down on the ramp before you even know what's happening. This situation is worsened if you land at night, as your visibility is drastically reduced while aliens still have full visibility across the map. And here's the first lesson of XCOM. This game doesn't teach you anything gently. You learn it through pain, trial, and the loss of many soldiers. Early on it may feel like your soldiers are dropping like lemmings, but if you pay closer attention to what you're doing, you can maybe preserve their lives a bit longer. One of the first things you can do to turn your failures into successes is to play super defensively. Things that may have seemed like a wasted space become tools, including my favorite, the smoke grenade. Once I started throwing down smoke grenades to obscure the ramp before heading out into the battlefield, the survival rates of rookies instantly increased from one turn to a lot longer in battle, and even to the end of it sometimes. Other types of grenades and explosives are super useful too, as they can be primed to go off at the end of the turn or after any arbitrary number of turns, allowing you to plant them and run back to safety.
12 seconds later.
You also start to get a feel for how different types of weapons work, as some are better at long-range shots, and some are really good at firing off tons of shots in succession at close range. Learning how to best equip a full squad with different kinds of weapons will help you to be able to better fight off the alien threat. Eventually, you do spot your first alien, and what was before just sounds and laser shots coming from darkened corners becomes a real being that you can shoot at and kill, if you can hit it, that is. One of the core components of XCOM combat is that each shot only has a certain percentage chance of actually hitting the intended target. This percentage chance is modified by several different factors, but most of them are fairly straightforward to understand. The first of these factors is the type of shots you're taking. Most weapons have three main firing modes: aim shots, snapshots, and auto shots. Aim shots are the most precise kind, and thus have the highest chance to hit at the cost of the most time units. You can usually only take one aim shot per soldier each turn, at least early on, so I tend to reserve these for when I absolutely need to kill an alien to save a soldier, or I'm trying to catch them off guard from a long ways away. Snapshots are a similar single-fire mode, but are only in the general direction of your target, meaning they use up much less time units at the cost of accuracy, but can be used multiple times or in conjunction with moving in a single turn. The last primary firing mode is the auto shot, which fires off 3 shots in quick succession. This mode costs slightly more time units than a snapshot does, and each shot is less accurate than the snapshot. However, the ability to get off multiple shots often results in higher practical accuracy. It's very common to see the first 2 shots miss and the third one land, and for only a few point time unit difference, you may hit much more often than you would by taking single snapshots. The auto shot is also useful when you're at point blank range, and needs to hit an alien several times to ensure its demise. The downside to this is it expends ammo much more quickly. However, if your ship is well equipped or your soldiers use ammo-less weapons, this becomes much less of an issue. There are several other factors that affect the chance for a shot to hit, including whether you are standing or crouching, the specific weapon type, any wounds that a soldier may have sustained, and their base accuracy stat that goes up with more combat experience. You can check a soldier's stats at any time by clicking the bottom bars of the screen, but when you go to take your shot, it will calculate all of that into the percentage for you. One thing to note is that the game does not calculate the exact chance of every individual shot to hit. For example, a shot where an alien is on the same level as you and 2 tiles away is already going to be much more accurate than trying to bullseye an alien halfway across the map and through a window. Instead, the percent chance really tells you how badly you could miss, as shots with low percentages have a wider range of trajectories they can take, whereas high ones may miss their mark but will likely be less than a degree or two off the mark. It's become a meme in the gaming community about how 99% accurate shots in the XCOM games mean nothing. But understanding what these percentages mean will leave you less frustrated and better prepared to make decisions in the heat of battle. Taking these low accuracy shots can have consequences more than just letting an alien live a bit longer. If you're not careful in your formations, they have a chance to hit your own squad and probably kill them, especially early on. And I was definitely guilty of this, a time or 30.
Betrayal.
Sometimes you'll be totally fine to take these 2% shots, however, as it's pretty tough to miss an alien right next to you. So do what you have to do when it comes down to brass tacks. You may even find yourself taking a low accuracy shot across the map in a desperate situation. Noted in the manual is the ability to melee with certain weapons, and there is even a screenshot that shows this as an action with a % chance of success. However, this appears to have been something that was cut very late in development, as only the stun rod has melee capabilities, and its attack says stun instead of hit. All other weapons are unable to do this. It's interesting to see that even at the point of creating, approving, and printing the manual, changes were still being made to the game. Upon tracking down the last alien and blasting it into green goo, you will reach the mission completion screen. Here you get a quick summary of everything that happened in the battle, including soldier deaths, alien deaths, and anything you may have recovered from the aliens and their craft in the course of the battle. Each of these has an associated point value, which results in a final score and a rating, which ranges from excellent on the upper end to terrible on the lower end. I would expect most missions to end with just an OK rating though, which is fine as that means your score is positive and will increase instead of decrease your monthly score. Your squad is likely decimated from the battle, so the first thing you'll want to do is go to the equip craft screen and replace any deceased troops with fresh ones, which is as simple as clicking on a soldier that has no craft assigned. It may seem callous to just replace the dead like that, but the aliens won't rest and neither can you. From this screen you can also add or remove any equipment you like from the craft, including stuff like tanks which take up the space of about 4 regular soldiers in a transport. After every battle you will probably learn a little bit better what works and doesn't work as far as equipment, weapons, and strategies, so you'll find yourself adjusting this equipment list throughout the whole course of a campaign. You will also have brought back some alien materials and corpses, which will help you to start researching more advanced weaponry and facilities. You can start research by clicking on the research tab from any base that has a lab and scientists, and selecting a new project from the available list. You'll then be able to select the number of scientists you want to assign to this topic. You can have several research topics going on at once, but until you have more scientists and possibly even a second lab on your main base, you'll likely want to focus on one at a time, as each scientist that is allocated to a project will reduce that project's research time drastically. Unlike Civilization, you don't know how much time it will take to research a tech ahead of time, but you start to get a better feel of it as you progress along a campaign. The choice of what technology you want to research and when is totally up to you. Not all techs lead to major advances or new weapons, but at the very least you will start to learn more about the alien threat and slowly gain more tools to fight them. One thing you will want to do, however, is build an alien containment facility. As it turns out, you can get a lot more information by interrogating living aliens instead of cutting open their corpses. To capture these aliens, you will need to use stun rods at them at point blank range, so adding a few of those to your Sky Ranger will certainly pay dividends. Once you finish your research task, you will receive a synopsis of what you learned and any equipment you may have unlocked. You will then be able to start to manufacture this equipment. The process is almost identical to research, just instead of labs and scientists, you need workshops and engineers. You can also specify any quantity of items you want to make, and each engineer added decreases the time to get one built. It will be essential to do this as basically all of the late game equipment can only be manufactured, not bought from the mystery free market that the game has. Besides doing research and manufacturing equipment, a lot of your time early on will be spent on fast forward waiting for a UFO to show up on your radar. It may even be advantageous to build a second and third base with only a radar and maybe a hangar to be able to cast a wider net to find and shoot down more UFOs. Shooting down every UFO and wiping out the survivors remains beneficial early on in the campaign, and at the end of the month you will get a report on what the nations think of your progress. As long as you were generally successful, you should receive a funding increase for most nations, although you may lose some money from the previous month if a certain country was not well covered by your radar network. It's important to try to keep all of the nations generally happy and your overall score positive, as having 2 months in a row of a negative score will result in a game over. The game over screen is pretty dire too, as the cities of Earth are erased and the human survivors are eventually mutated into a grotesque shadow of their former self. Luckily, a game over just means being kicked back to the main menu and having to reload a save, so it's not too catastrophic as long as you save fairly often. You may struggle mightily with the first few battles or blow them away, but luckily there's a dynamic difficulty system that will ratchet up or down the number of UFOs thrown at you and the type of aliens you get if you're consistently over or underperforming. This always keeps it feeling like you're winning but not dominating, which is good for keeping you on your toes. This happened to be a stroke of luck, as in most versions of the game there's a bug where after the first Battlescape mission, the difficulty of all future missions will be set to beginner. So if you choose any difficulty higher than that, you won't be challenged near as much as you expect. However, with the aforementioned dynamic difficulty, the game will still do its best to challenge you anyways. If you really want to do a superhuman run, I suggest Open XCOM as it has more advanced AI anyways and the difficulty bug has been fixed. Eventually you will get a pop-up showing a clearly terrified civilian, informing you that aliens have landed in a specified city and are picking off civilians. Now this is an attack you cannot ignore, as terror missions give massive negative score penalties if ignored. So, ready or not, you will need to send your Sky Ranger over to wherever it may be to try and save the civilians before it's too late. For me, the terror missions are the epitome of what gives XCOM such lasting appeal. High stakes, lots of unknowns, and lots of places for baddies to hide. Especially at night and the first few times you play, every step is terrifying. By the point you've started terror missions, your soldiers have probably ranked up a bit, and you may have even started to get really attached to them. Terror missions, however, are much more fraught, as not only do you need to try to keep the civilians alive, but there are many more buildings, obstacles, and small corners where an alien can hide and end your career. I will talk about the soundtrack more in depth in a bit, but the Battlescape track helps to ratchet up the tension by being just a bit unsettling. And although there aren't audio cues for discovering an alien, you would swear there is for how often a discordant note hits right after one appears at the fringes of your soldier's vision. Even if you haven't seen the aliens yet, you will hear the sounds of them opening and closing doors, as well as executing civilians that you haven't even run into yet. It all starts to build the terror and tension pretty quickly. The best part of this is that none of it's scripted and none of it ever happens the same twice. Each terror mission is changed by the location, the time of day, and the alien race that's terrorizing the city. Although you will eventually become familiar with a lot of basic environments and enemy tactics, every mission plays out slightly differently, and that sense of terror never really quite goes away. Even if you feel like the first basic terror mission isn't that bad, eventually you will start to meet some species that really strike fear into your heart. Early on, you will have only met the basic little gray men known as sectoids, and while fearsome, they're pretty weak. However, you will probably run into a species that doesn't seem like it will change anything, but flips everything against you almost instantly. The Chryssalids. The thing about the Chryssalids is that you almost never see them right away. They accompany the snakeman species, which, similar to the sectoids, don't have many special abilities and are fairly weak. You will see the snakeman first, and probably take out one or two of them. However, the terrifying moment comes when you open a door and see a dark form standing in front of you. The Chryssalids seemingly have a knack for hiding in a dark corner and attacking right when you run out of time units. They don't carry any guns, but they do have a pretty insidious trick up their sleeve. If you see a Chryssalid and don't have enough time units to shoot and kill it, chances are the soldier's not only dead, but will be turned against you for the rest of the battle. Chrysalids implant their eggs into civilians and your soldiers, which creates zombies that can go on to kill the rest of them. The zombies themselves are fairly weak and can only melee attack, but the problem doesn't end when you kill them. When you exterminate a zombie, the exterior falls away and a new Chrysalid hatches out, ready to terrify and zombify your whole squad in a matter of turns. Due to the massive threat that these guys pose, the moment you see a snake man, you'll instantly want to be on high alert. Never letting soldiers move alone, preserving time units for reaction shots, and generally making sure that you're keeping more open space between your squad and the next dark corner where one of these terrors could be lurking. Luckily, there's a few small buttons on the bottom left area of the battle screen that can help you from accidentally running out of time units. These 4 little buttons here will allow you to reserve enough time units for whatever type of shot you want to take, or to default to not reserve any and let you continue to move and take actions until you run out. This is super valuable if you want to reserve time units for reaction shots during the aliens' turns, or if you just want to get a little bit closer to take your shot during yours. Although you should ideally try to keep civilians alive if you can, It's much more important in the long run to keep your soldiers alive and progressing. So in Snake Man terror missions, it might be worth it to pack heavy explosives and rocket launchers, and blast away whenever you see movement out of the corner of your eye. There is a penalty for causing the death of a civilian directly, but again that pales in comparison to both the score cost and toll it costs on your campaign to lose experienced soldiers. One thing that will happen if you do start to lose tons of soldiers is seeing them panic. Your troops are not just robotic drones, but representation of human beings that have different levels of fear, bravery, and composure. They all start with fairly low levels of bravery and morale, but after a few missions of experience and promotions will gain more. So the more experienced and higher ranked soldiers will not panic as easily at death or injury. The flip side to this, however, is that if a higher ranking soldier falls, the rest of your squad takes a much larger hit to morale, meaning that you may want to hang them back and use the rookies a bit more as cannon fodder to keep your whole squad from panicking. When your soldiers do panic, however, a few different things can happen. One of the most dangerous is going berserk, which causes them to fire wildly in many different directions. This can mean hitting an alien, but more often than not it seems to mean killing your own troops. The other actions they can take are much more harmless but still annoying, including standing still for the whole turn, or dropping their weapons and running in a random direction, which can also result in their own death anyways a lot of times. It can take a few turns for their morale to recover, so if one of your troops panics you may as well plan on not having them for the next little while. This mechanic can ratchet up the tension during a battle, but it also makes you keep a much closer eye on your troops and care about them a bit more. When they don't just stand there under fire but turn tail and run if it gets too tough, it makes you a bit more cautious and scared of losses than if they just continue to trudge on as if nothing happened. Although the game is now just over 30 years old, I still think the presentation is really well done and helps to lean into the foreboding atmosphere the game creates. The first aspect of this is the art style. Led by art director John Wrightsey, a cohesive art style emerged which combined a little bit of a retrofuturism Marvel style with some Japanese influences. The Marvel style is readily apparent in the intro, which was created almost entirely by Wrightsey, while the Japanese influences are more apparent in the inventory images showing the XCOM soldiers. Wrightsey also designed and created the majority of the alien sprites, which Julian Gollop later went on to categorize into tiers and groups and integrate into the multi-species coalition that is the alien attackers. This is a bit like the Covenant in Halo, just about a decade ahead of time. The artwork for weapons and equipment is also excellent, with every item being distinct enough to tell immediately what it is and have a good idea of its function. And the same familiarity extends to the environmental objects. Besides any alien elements that are introduced, the Earth environments are not exactly realistic, but are grounded enough to make it feel like home that is being invaded by an abstract threat. These environments include gas stations, homes, and warehouses, which really helps to hit home that you are defending the average citizen in their day-to-day life, and not just an abstract battlefield. The other major part of the presentation is the sound. The soundtrack was created by Microprose UK's John Broomhall, while sound effects were done by Andrew Parton. Broomhall says they composed for lower quality devices like the Sound Blaster first to get the atmosphere down, and then upgraded it for higher quality synths like the MT32. This was the opposite of what he'd done before, where he would start with the most expensive cards and downgrade it for cheaper ones later on. Broomhall says this made the Sound Blaster track much better on this game and basically the original intention. But I still love the slightly upgraded instrumentation on the MT32. Right from the moment you start a new game, the Geoscape sets a tense mood with this chilling track. This track runs over 8 minutes and constantly catches you off guard with pulsing reverb that keeps you on edge. Broomhall said this track was heavily influenced by Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, and it has a similar effect of always keeping the player on edge. The other major track is the Battlescape theme. This track has a much shorter runtime, but it plays even harder to that theme of dread and foreboding. Broomhall mentioned that he subtly increased or decreased the tempo every so often in the song just to throw off the regularity of it. And that really helped to make the battlescape more tense. The track is also accompanied by sound effects such as troop footsteps, alien blasters, and even deaths that punctuate the atmosphere with small events that make it just slightly more tense. Aside from the two major tracks, the start and end of mission music are much more energetic and upbeat, which helps you really get hyped up when you're getting ready to touch down with your soldiers. The presentation perfectly highlights the gameplay loop to create this sense of tension that is as fraught as a horror game full of scripted moments. But in this case, it's almost entirely incidental. The environment is perfectly suited to long play sections at night lit up only by a CRT display. And in my mind, this is what gives the game such lasting appeal. No matter how comfortable you get with the mechanics and progression, there's always that little bit of unsettling environment keeps the players on the edge of their seat and coming back for another campaign. If on one of your various missions you manage to stun and capture an alien of Navigator rank, you will then be able to interrogate them to find out more about the alien communication network. Interrogations are basically just research named after that alien in question, and when completed you will be able to build the best radar in the game, the Hyperwave Decoder. This radar massively improves your ability to plan what UFOs you should shoot down and which ones you should intercept on the ground, as well as which ones are best left alone. Especially as UFO activity increases throughout the globe and larger, more dangerous ships appear, you will want to pick your battles wisely. This is especially important as you'll be trying to catch up with their technology as quickly as possible. Once you have the Hyperwave Decoder constructed at your base, the details you get on any detective UFOs will be massively increased. In addition to all the info you got before, you now find out what the specific craft type is, which alien race is operating the ship, and what kind of mission they're on. The mission and craft information is especially vital, as that can tell you if it's important to try to intercept those UFOs, and which ones are the safest targets. As long as you continue to capture and interrogate alien leaders and engineers, you will find out more about each individual UFO and mission type, which will allow you to make much more informed decisions on what you should do going forward. As you get later in the game, you'll get more advanced technology based off of what you recover from aliens, including flying battlesuits, plasma weaponry, and more advanced craft of your own. The problem is that many of the supplies needed to construct and supply this fancy gear are only available by stealing them from the aliens. This includes such component parts as alien alloys, UFO navigation, and most critical of all, Illirium-115. Illirium is the main fuel source for advanced fighters and transports, and a key component for creating the highest level weapons and armor, and thus in the mid to late game you will be going through this like a 5-year-old on their Halloween candy. Thus you will want to watch for alien supply missions to follow as they land, which when completed will net around 150 units of Illirium along with tons of other goodies. The con to the existence of alien supply missions is that they only pop up when aliens have established a base somewhere on Earth. Eventually this is bound to happen, and the presence of the base causes consistent score penalties both overall and in the area that the base is present. Not only do these alien bases pose a threat directly to your own XCOM bases by being a persistent source of UFO traffic, they may cause such a score penalty that one of the member nations of XCOM withdraws from the organization and enters into a secret pact with the aliens, permanently ending their funding to you. Not only do nations over time drop off and decide to be traitors, but as you build more bases, hire more employees, and create more facilities, your costs will skyrocket. Eventually, even if you keep all the nations happy, your costs will massively outpace your funding, and you'll need to find another source of income. Luckily, there are tons of other ways to make money, namely through some good old-fashioned sales. One thing you can do is sell recovered alien supplies and equipment that are greatly in excess of your needs. Alien corpses fetch a neat fee, and beyond keeping one around for dissection research, the rest are dead weight. You can also sell things such as mine probes and heavy plasma rifles, as they fetch a pretty penny and you don't really need more than you can equip a whole squad with. Another way to turn a tidy profit is manufacturing goods specifically to sell. One particularly profitable piece of tech is the laser cannon meant for interceptor-style craft. Although a good weapon on its own, it requires no special materials and sells for $29,000 more than it costs to make. The XCOM wiki, appropriately named UFOpedia, has a whole page on manufacturing profitability, and including labor, they estimate that a single maxed out workshop manufacturing and selling laser cannons full-time will result in profits of $1.96 million a month. Just imagine what that can look like if you really abused it with tons of workshops. And with that, this kind of becomes a military-industrial complex simulator, but I don't mind turning a profit as long as it keeps my bases open. Eventually, we'll start having battles that pose a threat even more deadly than that of the Chryssalids and their zombies. When you start having missions against the ethereals and higher-level sectoids, during their turn you'll start seeing and hearing something like this. And what's so terrifying about this is not only can it panic your troops faster, but the aliens can get possession of your soldiers directly and use them to gun each other down. Ironically, missions against psionic-capable aliens encourages an opposite approach to what you would do for Snake Man missions, as here having a bunch of troops grouped together likely results in one being mind-controlled and taking out several of his buddies. It's terrifying the first time it happens, as you seem to have no real way to fight against it. Luckily, however, it's not as dire as it seems at first, as if you can manage to capture an ethereal or a psionic-capable sectoid, you can study them and learn how to use psionics yourself. This involves creating a psionic lab in your base, and assigning soldiers to train there each month. At the end of each month, you'll get the results of training, which lets you know the psionic strength and skill of troops that have undergone training, as well as deciding whether to keep training them for the next month. There are two stats that govern psionics for soldiers: strength and skill. Strength is innate and cannot ever be increased, so if your soldiers have less than a 60 or so strength, they're not worth training any further, and in fact you may want to start sacking them for better psionic capable ones. Skill is the measure of how well the troops can use their innate ability, so keeping them in training for longer will help to improve this. Skill can also be increased on the battlefield, simply by attempting to use mind control and panic operations on aliens. Even if it fails, they'll slowly gain psionic skill from it, so it's worth letting everyone who would like to be a high-level psychic operative to go at it in battle, even if their attempts rarely succeed. Each soldier will need a psyop manufactured to allow them to use psionic attacks, and once you have a whole squad full of psychics, it can change everything in battle. Essentially, once you have a full maxed out squad of psionics, the moment you spot an alien you can mind control them, then use them to spot other aliens who can then be mind controlled themselves. You can even get them to toss their weapons on the ground so they're no longer a threat. They do have to be recontrolled each turn, but the better your soldiers get at this, the easier it is to pull off. A powerful psychic squad can start to trivialize any mission where the aliens don't have psionic abilities, and helps to even the odds against soldiers that do have psionic abilities, as high psi strength soldiers are much more resistant to these kind of attacks. Julian Gollop reflected later that psionics were probably the most unbalanced part of the game, but he was glad they didn't restrict it much, as it was much more fun to give players tons of options on how to take on combat situations. Coming back around to alien bases, eventually you'll want to start taking them out. Not only will this help to get rid of the constant score penalty, but they also contain tons of materials in the highest rank aliens who you will want to capture. By now you will have probably researched the alien origins technology, which simply tells you that the only hope for the human race to win this war is to find the alien base somewhere in the solar system and attack it directly. The only way to do that is to capture an alien leader, and while they can be found on larger UFOs, the best bet is to find them by attacking a base. Preferably a base for a race other than mutons, who don't have leader and commander rank aliens. Assaulting a base is a very different kind of mission from what you've done previously. Instead of dropping in on a transport, your soldiers will start spread across two different large elevator rooms, and will need to descend into the structure to start your assault. Similar to the terror missions, there are lots of nooks and crannies in which aliens can hide, and turning around any corner can reveal ones waiting to unload hot plasma into your soldiers. The bases are not entirely halls of alien metals, but also have cave sections which are being overrun with alien flora, which gives it a very different vibe than any other mission you will have played so far. Other than that, these missions are fairly straightforward. You may want to bring a mind probe and check each alien for their rank before deciding whether to stun them or blast them away. But once you successfully stunned or killed every alien, you will succeed and the base will be destroyed, as well as ending the point penalty for that base and removing it from the map permanently. Your problems, however, are not over. Once a base has been destroyed, or when you've been particularly successful at shooting down UFOs in a region, the aliens will start an alien retaliation mission, with the goal of finding your XCOM base. If they are able to successfully fly over and detect it, they will send in a battleship to take out the base. In the fairly likely event that the battleship survives your base defenses, a new type of mission will immediately begin: the base defense. A base defense is perhaps one of the most frightening missions you'll play the first time that it happens. All throughout your campaign you've been constructing this base, and enjoyed it as a small safe space against the alien intrusions that the world is suffering from. Now, however, the base you built is turned against you, as you must fight through a map based exactly on the base that you've built. And it really turns things on its head when you are on the defensive instead of the offensive. Your troops will typically deploy inside storage areas and living quarters, while the alien troops will deploy inside any hangars and the access lift to your base. Luckily, however, you are at the advantage, as the entirety of the base is fully lit except for the hangars, and you even get better visibility into those than the lighting may suggest. There are certainly opportunities while designing your base to plan strategically for an invasion with choke points. However, I kinda neglected to do this and had to just run with what I had. One thing to keep in mind is many of the facilities can be destroyed if they take too much damage, so you may want to be careful with how much you use blaster launchers and high explosives. Losing a critical facility like a hyperwave decoder or a workshop could set you back a month or so, which late in a campaign is not something you want to have to spend money on and wait for. Some bases may not be worth defending, however, as you will probably have a few small outposts that really only serve to detect UFOs that are staffed by a few unarmored rookies. The score penalty for losing a base defense is minimal, as you lose the base entirely, which is a much steeper consequence long term than a negative score. You can go ahead and rebuild the base, however, so if you lose a small outpost to aliens, it's totally okay. Losing all of your bases, however, will result in a game over, so make sure to ratchet up your defense efforts if many of them start to fall. One small point that I didn't really find a good section for, but I wanted to mention, was the armor system. Armor goes a huge way into upgrading your troops and making them more resistant to damage, as well as later increasing their ability to traverse the battlefield. Flying armor in particular allows your soldiers to move up and down a level, which is particularly useful for shooting into second-story windows, or avoiding Chryssalids which cannot fly themselves. One thing to note, however, is that if a soldier is killed with armor on, that set of armor is destroyed permanently, so anytime you lose a troop with armor in battle, you will need to manufacture a few more sets of it to equip the replacements with. From here on out, I will be talking about the last few missions and the ending of the game, so if you want to keep at least the ending unspoiled, go ahead and skip to the timestamp listed on screen. Upon successfully interrogating and capturing an alien leader, you will get a research mission called the Martian Solution. Completion of this tells you that the aliens are coming from a well-hidden base on Mars which has all the facilities necessary to invade the Earth. The base also seems to be controlled by a central intelligence of some kind, the destruction of which will cripple the alien force for good and bring XCOM decisive victory against the alien threat. All that needs to be done to locate this base is the capture and interrogation of one more alien, an alien commander. The research tells you that these particular aliens can only be found in bases. However, they are also found on battleclass ships which are used to invade bases, and I got lucky that one showed up to attack one of my bases for me. Now this alien commander was for some reason a pain to keep stunned, as it seemed to continually awaken each turn after I stunned it, but eventually I got it subdued and interrogated. This interrogation reveals the final bit of information. The aliens are operating out of an underground base in Cydonia, a region of Mars covered with pyramids and a structure resembling a face. Now this is a direct reference to the real Martian region known as Cydonia, named after the Greek city-state of Kydonia in Crete. This region contains the distinctive face on Mars, which this research refers to as well. At this point, all that's left to do is prep work, finishing up psionic training, equipping soldiers with all the armor, guns, and equipment they need, and making sure you have an Avenger to transport them. The Avenger is the best ship in the game, and has both intercept and transport capabilities, as well as the ability to get to Mars apparently. Supposedly it's the ship shown on the cover of the US box, but I think the in-game art and model is a bit different than what we get on the box. The endgame is now here, and it's 2 missions back-to-back with no resupply and no room for failure. Failing or aborting either mission gives you an instant game over, so be sure that you have everything you need before pushing to Cydonia. Once you are ready to head off to Mars and vanquish the alien threat for good, you simply select the intercept button and then an Avenger, which then will allow you to choose Cydonia on the little bar that pops up on the top of the screen. You land in a semi-randomized map that looks unlike anything you've played before, but is the distinct reddish-orange of the Martian surface. The map is slightly different each campaign, but does indeed contain many pyramids, including one with a giant green floor. This is your target, as it contains the lift down to the alien base. Fighting your way to this alien elevator is a fairly straightforward process and mission, and once you get there you can go ahead and hit the abort button to take your surviving soldiers to the mission titled The Final Assault. You will also be taken to this mission immediately once all aliens are killed, so make sure that you have everyone in the room before you kill the last alien. This mission resembles that of previous Alien Base missions, but it's open season as far as the mix of types of aliens that can be here. I ran into Chryssalids and Ethereals, which is a deadly combination. Luckily, I was able to mind control the Chryssalids and keep them from zombifying any of my soldiers, but be aware that you will be facing both psionic and zombie-capable threats at the same time, which is a truly terrifying prospect. You will need to use all the knowledge and equipment that you have, and may even have to resort to stealing weapons off of aliens to survive. Overall, it's a pretty fitting mission to finish off a long campaign against the aliens. Instead of a standard base command center which can be found in other bases, Cydonia has a large brain room as described in the research. This room is defended by several ethereal commanders, but once they're down, there's nothing left between you and the alien brain. Shooting at this brain and destroying at least a quarter of it and ending your turn will trigger the ending cutscene. Here, the alien brain begs for its survival, informing you that they were the ones who seeded and developed the Earth originally, and they have the ability to get humanity to the stars, and thus should be spared. However, you won't listen to it, and why would you? They've just spent the last year or so trying to destroy the Earth. You have zero reason to trust them. So you melt the brain with hot plasma, despite its objections. And you've officially defeated the alien menace, with your research allowing the Earth to flourish and claim Mars for itself long after. As the cutscene states, the aliens have been vanquished, but for how long it's anyone's guess. And that's it for XCOM. You get dumped right back to the main menu without credits or anything. I think this is a pretty great ending, and has some cool art including the laser beams coming out of the face on Mars, though it would have been nice to get a congratulations screen like Ultima. I do like the little bit of lore that ties the Mars pyramids and the aliens to ancient humanity, and most of all it's just really satisfying to blast away that alien brain after having lost so many of your own soldiers to its cretins. Overall, XCOM is one of the most addictive games I've ever played. It's very easy to get sucked into a series of missions late at night, and the drive to want to continually improve your strategies, get better weapons, and beat back the ever-impending alien doom is timeless. It's no wonder that the game spawned tons of sequels, including a recent series of reboots which have been well received, as well as a genre all on its own. The original, however, has this appeal that I don't think will ever fade. The existence of Open XCOM and a plethora of mods for it only attests to its enduring appeal. An appeal built on addictive gameplay, a near-perfect structure, and unscripted moment-to-moment terror. I definitely recommend everyone try this groundbreaking game out, as I believe it's as amazing as the day it was released in 1994. Thanks so much to everyone who sat through the entirety of this review. I started on it expecting a fairly normal-length video, and it turned out that between reading Monsters in the Dark and my experiences, I had a lot more to say about this amazing game than I initially thought. If you like this one, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and share it with others. Everyone's support makes a big difference, and helps keep me going to make content on a more consistent basis. I have a bunch of cool projects that I'm working on coming up soon, so make sure to be on the lookout for those. Most importantly though, I hope that each and every one of you have a wonderful rest of your day.